and I lost my 19-year-old son to suicide in February of 2014. Since that time, I became actively involved with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and also a student-empowered program called Avante. And we've done that probably for the last 7 years.
Harrison Bailey, principal here at Liberty. I've been here for 10 years, but this is my 26th year in education. I am passionate about this work for a lot of reasons. One being I lost my best friend to suicide. But the other is in being in education for the number of years that I have, I've witnessed a lot of students who either needed help and they were not ready, or were ready and we couldn't get them the help. And so this is a passion of mine because I feel like we need to find a better way to make sure that that happens. And so we've been dedicated to that here at Liberty High School over the past 5-6 years or so. And so it's really kind of become part of our life's work. Part of what we've done in terms of working towards helping students with these needs is to, one, become a trauma-informed school. And so that is not a destination, but an ongoing journey in which we train our staff to understand trauma and how trauma and toxic stress affects the brains and bodies of our students and our staff. And as a part of that, formed a committee about 5 years ago, worked as a committee through it kind of encompassed our administrators, secretaries, teachers, and through that made a decision that we needed to create a wellness center here at Liberty High School. And so we took our old in-school suspension room, retrofitted that and part of our library, and built an actual wellness center. Within that center is a large peace room, which is designed just for what it sounds like, to allow students to regulate and provide a space for them to find peace, and a number of offices that are the home for social workers. And that space is obviously to provide therapy for those students that need it. Within the Peace Room, we also have occupational therapy that is provided by Moravian University, and the social work interns that work in there with those occupational therapy interns that work through Moravian University. We also provide mindfulness to all of our students. Every freshman that comes into Liberty High School receives mindfulness training, and that is done through the Pratyush Foundation here in the Valley.
Wow, that's awesome. Let's give that a round of applause, because a lot of times we're in a community or in a school or just something that's close to us, we don't realize how really innovative that is. But I travel around to a lot of schools, and that's the first school that I've heard of that's have a wellness center like that, so that's pretty awesome. Rishika, how are you?
Got it right this time.
I know, I'm sorry.
Hello, my name is Rishika Rohatgi. I'm a senior at Parkland High School. It's around 30 minutes out, not quite as big as this one. And I'm passionate about mental health awareness because I grew up in a community that was very competitive. And mental illness was kind of something that was swept to the side, pushed under the rug, pretended it didn't exist. But then over the pandemic, as like all my friends and I were in isolation, we realized that it was no longer something we could ignore. And so my best friend and I actually co-founded an initiative at our high school called the Parkland Mental Health Awareness Club, very aptly named. And this was designed to destigmatize the conversation around mental health and kind of have that student-to-student conversation so that we could give each other the support that we needed.
All right, we'll skip Emma. Y'all just heard a bunch from her. We'll let her go last. Okay, you can say something. Go ahead.
Oh, you were being serious.
No, I was.
Oh.
But I don't know.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to start with saying thank you. I'm so honored that you guys took the liberty to come to Liberty High and sit through and watch the documentary film on a weeknight. Truly humbled that you chose to spend your, Tuesday evening with us to have this conversation and to hear my story. I, as you saw, became passionate about mental health and suicide prevention after surviving my suicide attempt and really fully realizing the magnitude of this issue, that the youth are really struggling and suffering in silence. And once I really learned, like I said, kind of the magnitude of this problem, I knew that I needed to utilize my story and my experience to try to shed some light on this and try to destigmatize this pandemic, essentially, or this epidemic, if you will, of youth mental health. So I'm very appreciative that you chose to come to this event, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your questions and hopefully being able to provide you some answers. And I am honored to be a part of this panel with my fellow people. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Emma. Mr. Avante from Liberty High School. He took the liberty to come to Liberty High School. That's good.
Hello, my name is Avante Kendall. I'm a
Hold it
junior
up a little closer.
at Liberty High School. I'm very passionate about mental health because I'm involved in a lot. So it's really stressful to handle all that stuff all at once. So I feel like I became more passionate about mental health when we had the pandemic. I was really isolated. I had to go nowhere, obviously, because COVID. But I felt very isolated. No one was around. I couldn't see my friends. It was really weird. So I came open about feeling isolated and not feeling like myself anymore when the pandemic happened. And that's why I came to the Wellness Center, because it was a safe space for me to talk about how I feel and what's going on. And I feel like once I talked about it with someone in the Wellness Center, I've been open about it to my parents more than usual, because they're not really, they don't know how to deal with this sometimes. So now that they're getting to learn it, they're better people about it now. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Let's give him a hand. And Dr. Baumgartner.
Hi, my name is Dr. Georgia Bomgardner. I am a school psychologist as well as a licensed psychologist, and I have spent some time in high schools working as a school psychologist. I currently serve as Assistant Director of Programs for Shanti Project, which does mindfulness work and programming in our community. I also see adolescents, teenagers privately through the Center for Integrated Behavioral Health, and I think all of these things combined, the passion is there, but when you're able to talk with a young person and they open up to me about things they're struggling with, but also their own tools and resiliency, it only fuels that passion. I don't know how you can't be passionate about mental health and suicide prevention. And so I'm excited to be here with my fellow panelists. This is a really important topic, and this type of event, these community events, really fuel that passion additionally, because we need to better prepare our youth, but we also have to prepare our communities to support those youth and finding the tools that they need. So thanks for putting this together.
Thank you very much. And when Emma and I set out to make this film, that was one of the big, kind of goals. We wanted to make a good film, but we really wanted to make a film that could really spark conversations and bring people together and really hope, to help communities enhance suicide prevention efforts within their communities. Jim, who you met earlier, as I mentioned, was the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and if you don't know, that's one of the largest suicide organizations devoted to suicide prevention, and they have chapters around the country. And Jim, I'm hoping you could maybe talk a little bit about the scope of the problem here, in this area, and just some of the work that y'all do and have available to the community.
Sure. So if we talk about, and it was mentioned up on the video a little bit, was the age group of 10 to 24. It's the second leading cause. Suicide is the second leading cause of loss of life. Number one is accidental, and number three is homicide. So we lose more children to suicide than what you see on TV every day. It actually, from a national perspective, suicide is the 10th leading cause overall of loss of life. Homicide and what you see on TV is number 16. So in both cases, we lose more souls to suicide than we do to what we see on TV every day. The problem around that is there's stigma, right? There's stigma associated with suicide, there's stigma associated with mental health, and people aren't readily willing to come out and talk about it. That's kind of what a lot of I get inspired by this panel and the strength of Emma to do what she did with this documentary to push this out, because it kind of puts that word out and tries to destigmatize it. The community, I'd say that some of the panelists talk about the pandemic and how it's isolated children because we've gone virtually. We work with some school psychologists locally around here, and there's students that have not normally been on the radar for having struggles that are now on the radar. And we kind of need to just, I guess the general rule of thumb to talk to somebody that may be struggling is if you see it changing then, and the change lasts for 2 weeks or longer, open a conversation with them. Just open a simple conversation that says, I've noticed a change in you, I'm concerned about you, is everything okay? And it's not saying that they might go to the point of going into crisis and potentially taking their life, but it opens up a dialogue so that you can maybe break some barriers down and talk to them. So, and we have programs from an educational standpoint that talk about the scope of the problem, risk factors, warning signs, and how to talk to people about it. We do it from a faculty perspective. We have available programs from an educational perspective, and then we also, what's called More Than Sad, and then we have actually Talk Saves Lives, which is focused more towards the community to help people understand how bad this problem is, but that there is hope and it's preventable, and that we can help each other.
Awesome, thank you. Let's give a big hand for Jim and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So Rishika, I got it right there. I have a question for you and for Avante as well, but what's kind of the atmosphere or climate, would you say, in your school in terms of students being willing to talk about their mental health issues and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I would say that something that I've noticed is that students are a lot more willing to talk to other students about the issues that they're experiencing, and that not necessarily even their close friends, but just peers. And I think personally that that's something to do with when it's an administrator or a parent or, an adult figure. I'm sorry to say it's sometimes difficult to see them as people who've underwent the same struggles as yourself. And so it's really important for us as students to be able to reveal the sides of ourselves that are hurting and the sides of ourselves that aren't the picture perfect that we see on social media. And I think that, I mentioned that the Parkland Mental Health Awareness Club is trying to create that environment at our school. And we've really seen a positive reaction.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. Avante, what's it been like at your school? I mean, was it difficult to go to the wellness center the first time for you? Is there stigma around here, or feel like you're looked down on for going for help?
At first, it was difficult because I was like, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm perfectly fine. I'm over-exaggerating. But I feel like that's with a lot of students, not only at Liberty, but at other high schools, because you're becoming who you are, and you're going through all these changes. So I think it's more of us not being strong enough to come out to people and actually talk about our problems. So yeah, that's what I think about.
Thank you for that. Dr. Bomgardner, from a clinical perspective and having worked in the schools, I mean, what kind of happens with a student who might come to you and need help, or can you talk a little about that process and what that might look like for students?
Yeah, so I think it can be a little bit different in different places, but in my experience, if a student were to come to me and be vulnerable and share that they are struggling or that a peer is struggling, my first step is to listen to that and I think try to hear and validate too, because we've probably been told, like we heard in the documentary, you can't just snap out of it. Just saying to look on the bright side of things isn't going to change things around. and students need that trusted adult to be able to go to. And so I think different schools have maybe different policies on how to move forward depending on the severity of the concern that a student might bring to them, but the end goal is always to make sure that that student has the supports they need inside that space, that school, perhaps outside of that space, so looking for resources in the community, which again is another reason why this type of event is so important, because it serves to highlight all the various resources that might be available for a student that maybe isn't just, okay, let me try to hook you up with a therapist, because maybe a lot of students and parents know that that's very difficult to do, especially nowadays. And so there are other ways that schools can support our students, like the great work that Liberty has done in developing a wellness center and providing that as part of day-to-day instead of as being more of a reactive approach to student need. I think we're seeing schools provide more of those preventative resources by giving students the skills to not only identify when they're needing support, but help their peers through those difficulties. Recognizing that peers are not mental health therapists, they're not counselors necessarily, but that doesn't mean they can't be resources, and they can't be maybe that next step that a student needs to find that support that's life-saving and life-changing. And so I hope that answers that question there.
No,
I
that's
think
great.
that there's just so much to be done and to expand upon, but there's a lot of great work already happening, and I'm so glad we're highlighting it here.
Thank you. Emma, if you can think way back when you were in high school, like 4 years ago. And what was it like? What was the school-like environment when you were in high school as far as, people talking about mental health or thinking you could ask for help or that sort of thing?
Yeah, so my experience in high school is quite similar to Rishika's experience in high school. I grew up in a very competitive environment. My high school in particular was very much so, I say this to people, it was the most private appearing public school that exists, solely based around kind of what was seen to be normal at my school. So it was very competitive, and there were tons of pressures, both externally and internally, that I was placing on myself. So mental health was never something that was talked about, and honestly, I hadn't heard the words mental and health used together until after I attempted suicide. So I didn't even know that it was a thing that existed, and that is probably why there was no talk about it, no exposure to it. And the knowledge for me was so minimal. And honestly, I think that is one of the reasons why I never identified what I was experiencing as mental illness. I never identified that what I was struggling with was actually depression, and that I had been suffering from anxiety. So I never identified those to be real for me because there was no knowledge. That was something that I thought was completely foreign, and I thought that only people who take medications suffer from depression and anxiety because that's what TV commercials said. The side effects were that. So that was really the extent of my knowledge when it came to mental health and what it looks like. So as far as the communication and kind of the overall talk in my school, mental health was not one of them at all.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Dr. Bailey, we've heard a lot of talk in the film and from young people here just in terms of the pressure that they felt with school. As an administrator, as an educator, how do you do that? Balance the students maybe being overwhelmed with school and the mental wellness piece?
That's a great question. I don't know that anyone has that figured out. I think because it's a very personal journey, right? Some students place extreme pressure on themselves in athletics. Some do it in academics. Some do it in all genres. And so I think it's a very bless you. A very unique experience for each student. And so I think that's why it's so important that all of our staff are aware, right, that this is a potential issue for each child. and that you have your eyes open and you're talking. And one of the things that we have in place at Liberty is a very vibrant, what we call SAP process, Student Assistance Program. Every high school in Pennsylvania is charged with having one. And it really is about that anyone in a school, and including parents, can refer a student and say, hey, there's something going on, I'm concerned. And that referral goes to our student service centers, which ends up with our guidance team talking about a particular student's case and saying, hey, is there something here? Do we need to do something to support this student, and try to investigate that? But I can tell you that it is a very unique journey for every student. The one thing I need to say is I'm very, very thankful for all of the service providers that are here. You guys are saving lives every day, and I'm extremely thankful for the services that we have. Pinebrook, incredible organization. Community and schools, as I said, working with Moravian University, the Pratt Youth Foundation, all of those services are truly, truly impactful. But I need to be very clear, and I was fortunate this past week to be in DC and speak with the Secretary of Ed, the US Secretary of Ed. We are in an epidemic, and that epidemic existed before the pandemic hit. We do not have anywhere near the number of social workers, psychologists, therapists that we need. When you have children say, I need services, and we as a school say, we don't have any more services to give, that is a crime. That's a crime. And we have a wellness center. So I cannot imagine what is happening in schools across the world who have nothing. What's happening in rural Pennsylvania, where there aren't social workers or therapists for 1,000 miles. What are they doing? It needs to be understood, not just by the people in this room, but our legislatures, that they need to do something now. We don't have the people. Liberty High School has a massive grant. We have money. We can't find people to do the work. So they need to do something now. It is absolutely critical.
And and you touched on a couple things. I mean, one thing in doing this work around communities and just being up on the on the national news and the local news, we've seen a lot recently, with parents or people going to the school board to protest about different things, and not to get into the debate on whether that's right or wrong, but just seeing their real vigor of going to these things, and think if more parents were doing that around mental health issues, because this issue is really taking lives. And I've, through my previous film and this film, I've got to know a lot of family members and people who've lost loved ones to suicide. And I think a lot of people don't really think about the impact. People I think, well, that's really sad they died by suicide, but they wanted to die. And we don't really think about the family members and the loved ones who are left behind, and who are experiencing all kinds of trauma and the after effects of their young person or their friend who died by suicide. And I think if more people really heard those stories and really recognized the impact that it's having on society, on families, on friends and everything, they would stand up and demand action, like Dr. Bailey was saying, because that's really the only way our legislators are going to make a big, do something, is if the constituents demand that they do something. And Jim touched on earlier, kind of the thing with gun violence and versus suicide. One of the things I've also seen is if you look at say mass shootings or school shootings, over the years there's been a couple hundred young people that have died by mass shootings, which is tragic, of course, and something must be done about it. But there's literally been hundreds of thousands of young people in that same time period that die by suicide, and there's been very little done about that, or at least the coverage of that is pales in comparison to gunshots or gun violence. So with that, I just wanted to ask Jim if you wouldn't mind, from the parent perspective, of what this journey has been like for you and why you have decided to turn your pain into purpose and help other people, and also what can parents do? What would you recommend parents do?
I had a bad feeling you were going to go down this road. This is probably the hardest thing. I've told Josh, my son's story, hundreds of times. It's probably the hardest thing. It was hard, but I can talk about his journey and his struggles more than I can. It's easier to talk about his struggles than I can talk about my struggles. My life has changed. It will on February 14th at 5 o'clock in the morning. My life changed forever. I never wanted it to change. I struggled with having to change. I had no choice but to make it change, and kind of move on. I didn't know where my future was going to go. I didn't know, it was a week out from losing Josh, and I couldn't see, almost like Josh, I couldn't see another week in front of me, another day in front of me. I can tell you that, as bad as this sounds, my son lives 2 miles from home, but he'll never come home. And I struggle with that, and I was upset, and I was angry, and I felt guilty. I guess over time, the one story I tell any family member I met is I was sitting at a store one time waiting for a hoagie being made, and the emotions just standing there just came over me, and I just had to walk out. So over time, the peaks and valleys never go away. They get further apart. And over time, it's actually my wife found the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention a couple months later, and then we found a program, like I mentioned earlier, what's the Student Empowered program called Avante, and actually found some therapeutic, it kind of helped me through this journey, that I could tell Josh's story, and it kind of helped me along a little bit. I kind of met a lot of great people on this journey that have struggled and have lost loved ones to suicide, because there's a whole lot of people out there in this community, that have lost loved ones and friends to suicide that we don't talk about. But as we started talking, and as we started getting more involved and talking to people, and they started welcoming us in and looking for the help, it's kind of been a better journey. It's kind of helped me through that cause, and through where I am. And I can say that my son put me on this journey. This journey will never change. It's never something I'll ever stop. And he's taught me a lot, even after he's gone.
Thank you for that. Georgia, Dr. Georgia, sorry. What can parents, look out for, or, what kind of advice would you give to parents? Because we know it's can be difficult to distinguish between a moody teenager and somebody that might need, mental health help.
I think Jim made a good point earlier in that intense behavior change that is maybe unexplained or unexpected, and that can look different for any child, any student. And just being in that space and offering a listening ear and a validating ear when those things do come up, whether they seem small to you, or even maybe your kiddo says, I don't think this is a big deal, but I'm feeling like this, right? Paying attention to that and making a note of it and observing and, keeping your eyes and ears open, maybe listening if friends are relating any of this information. I mean, the film we watched described a lot of the warning signs that you might look for, but really I think a big hallmarker is that just big behavior change. And again, that can look different in different people and for different families. Something I tell students a lot when I work with them is to remember that if you're going to a trusted adult, someone you know who cares about you, to share these things with you, knowing that it's maybe going to be hard for them to hear that you're struggling. And it's easy to kind of put some blinders on to say, you know, oh, this can't be my kiddo, or they've got all these other great things going on for them. How could they be struggling with the mental health concerns such as that? I never saw it coming. It can't be my kid. And for your teenager, they don't feel like they have a lot of time necessarily, and you might feel like you do. And I try to tell teens, you know, your loved ones care about you, and that's why they're upset in these instances sometimes when these tough emotions come up, these hard and scary emotions. And so as the adult in that person's life, if they're coming to you with that information, being able to validate it, to talk through what's happening, to figure out what the next best step is, and to making sure that there's safety for that student and they have those resources. And I know that sometimes that feels like a privilege, but I also think, you know, if you think about what Dr. Bailey said about the services available in schools, although they are absolutely not enough, and I appreciate that you were able to say that so bluntly, there are services and there are referral mechanisms through schools, and those are great resources. And so reaching out in that capacity can be helpful, because as a parent, you also don't have to do this alone. And there's no handbook for you on how to do this, but you can always be reaching out for that support, just like you'd be encouraging your student to reach out for support.
Awesome, thank you. I'll go to Emma, and then I'll get Rishika and Avante to touch base on this. What advice, for lack of a better word, would you give to parents out there to better be supportive of their young person who may be struggling, or maybe they're not struggling, but just to kind of be preemptive to maybe a young person experiencing challenges?
I would say two things. Firstly, never assume that you understand what your kid feels. I felt like I kind of got swept into, you know, this stereotype, and my parents and my loved ones and the adults in my life just kind of assumed that because I was, you know, a varsity cheerleader, I had great popularity, my parents were happily married, I had just gotten a new car when I turned 16. So because I had all these things going on in my life that were seemingly positive, I feel like they kind of assumed that because my life was like that, that there was no grounds or reason for me to be feeling anything other than grateful and happy. So that would be the first thing, is never to assume anything about your kid. And then something else that maybe could have made a difference in my experience would have been, I felt like the adults in my life were constantly trying to fix my problems. And a lot of times whenever I would be overwhelmed or really going through something and really just need a vent and rant, I would go to a loved one or an adult, and it felt like they viewed me coming to them as them needing to find a solution to whatever it was that I was expressing or going through, and that wasn't necessarily what I was looking for. A lot of times I just would need a validating ear, and not someone to have to relate to. And I felt like oftentimes when I would be expressing things, the adults in my life would immediately feel like they needed to, A, work towards a solution to fix the problem for me, or B, try to relate with me and say, oh, well, I experienced that too, and I turned out just fine. Or, you know, people out there have it worse than you, and, you know, they make it through. So hearing things like that definitely affected me negatively. I don't blame anyone. I certainly don't blame my mom or dad, because obviously hindsight is 20/20 and you don't know what you don't know. However, looking back, there were certainly things that could have been handled much differently. And one of those things could have been just the approach that my loved ones took when dealing with my problems and my mental health overall.
Great, thank you. Rishika, would you like to?
So I think the biggest thing that I would say to parents, being a teenager who has also gone through the struggles of isolation, just like my peer up here, is that it's not your fault that I'm feeling like this. I think often when we go to tell our parents or loved ones, they go and they question, what did I do wrong? Why are you feeling like this? I've done everything for you. And it's not always about like that circumstance. There doesn't necessarily have to be a substantial reason. What should be focused on is how the person is feeling and how we can address that in a way that's not necessarily pushy, but just supportive. And I think one of the reasons that, therapy is often refused isn't necessarily because of kids, because, just the environment that I have, therapy is something that my friends and I joke about, but, it's generally accepted as this is okay to go to. But it's the parents, or at least sometimes parents who are thinking, what is this saying about my family that my kid needed to go to therapy? And it's not about that. It's about being able to give your loved one the support that they need.
Oh, let's give that a hand. Avante, you had mentioned just kind of the challenges with going to your parents or them kind of understanding. What would your kind of advice to parents be?
I would say my advice would be just to check up on your kid and see how they're doing from on time to time, because I know that my parents are always busy. I know my parents are busy and I'm very busy. So I wouldn't see them hours of the day. And sometimes my mom would work overnight shifts, so I would not see her at all till the next day. And my dad would just be watching the other kids. So I would say just make sure you're checking up on all your kids and make sure they're doing okay, because it is very hard going into high school and going through all this drama, stupid drama that does not matter at all, because later in the year, you're never going to see your friends that you had the drama with anyway. But anyway, it's just that you need to check up on your kids and make sure that they're doing well with themselves.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Bailey, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but there's a great line in the film. One of the things I like the most with Dr. Hudnall, when he said, the founder of the Hope Squad, when he said, this is not a school issue, this is a community issue. I think a lot of times we think the school's going to fix everything with our young people. But what would you kind of say to the community as far as how can they, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but how can the community really, support you and be there, and it could really be a community collaboration to help the young people?
I would say, exactly what you said, is that for a lot of reasons, schools have felt the need to take on a lot of community-related services, right? So at a place like Liberty High School, obviously we feed students, we clothe students, we have a dental van, we have a vision van, mental health, obviously, physical health. So we do all of these services that once were really community services. And we do it because we know that unless those needs are being met for students, they're not going to be able to learn. And that's our primary focus. And so our teachers, our secretaries, our custodians work overtime to try to make sure these services get provided so that students can learn. And so anything that community services can provide, can partner with us on providing for our students is a huge step, because many of our students, if they're not accessing those services at their schools, we know that they're not getting those services. I would strongly encourage any providers out there to partner with whatever schools are in your locale. The principals I know, they're going to be more than willing to try to figure out how to allow you to be a part of that process, because many of them are providing the services themselves at this point. That would be my suggestion.
Great, thank you. So we might have it don't seem like we have any cards, but do we have a question?
Does anybody in the audience have any questions for everyone up front?
Wait, first of all, would my Avitum friends come on up here while you got the mic here? Come on down. So, come on up here. Come on up here while you're at it. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I really meant to put you on the spot. if you're, come on down here by me. So if you're not familiar with Avitum, it's an awesome student-led club that they're going to tell you more about right now.
Okay. Hi. It's really bright up here, just in case you're wondering. My name is Cassie, and this is Lauren. I'm a senior at Nazareth High School, and I've been a part of Avitum since 7th grade, so 6 years. And we work in the school to create a positive school culture for not only the students, but the staff as well. And we do talk workshops and things like that to train other schools in our model to be just like us and, well, not just like us, but, you know. So we train other schools in our model and how to run a healthy school environment, and so that every student knows that somebody out there has their back, and that's kind of like our slogan, you know. So yeah. Yeah.
Oh, got your back. Nice. All right. Did you have anything to add? Awesome. All right, let's give them a big hand, and they'll be out front with information and stuff, how they can start their own. And then we have this for the questions. Oh, okay, good. Perfect. All right. Did we have any questions? Because they'll come around. All right, go pick someone.
While they're doing that, you mind if I say one quick thing?
I would love for you to say
I
one.
just want to say, I would be remiss without thanking a couple people. First, Claire Hogan, if you're in the house. Claire Hogan, a huge director of student services here in the district and an absolute ally for this work. She has done so much to help us here at Liberty. So, thank you. Ross McCary, who's in the back there, he's our MacGyver here at Liberty. He's the one who made sure all this is working and doing all that. Thank you, Ross. And Nick Samatolidis, who is one of my assistant principals, but is our liaison for mental health here at the school. So,
Awesome.
Thank you.
And while we're giving people shout outs, I don't know if you remember in the film where there was that really cute boy that was giving Emma piggyback rides. Well, that's him right there, everybody. Give a shout out for Evan. Okay, do we have questions? I can't see. Yes, it is bright lights.
I guess my question is, what more can we do with student athletes? Because I feel there's more and more happening with student athletes and suicide.
Well, just from my perspective, I would say to make sure that they are alleviating as much pressure from themselves as possible. Because when you're in a sport, particularly a competitive sport, there's already naturally pressure involved. So just really honing in on them that there's no need to put any more pressure on yourself, and that the sport should ultimately be for fun. So just maybe drive that home that it's supposed to be fun. So rid yourself of the pressure, because I put pressure on myself in a lot of ways in a lot of areas of my life, but one of the biggest places I put pressure on myself was with cheerleading. So that's from my perspective.
Great, thank you.
Hi there. You mentioned it, and I forget your name in the yellow sweater. Is it Dr. Bomgardner? Okay, thank you. I've talked to several other parents, and, trying to find therapy or resources was always hard, but now it is so challenging. So, what's the best advice? Because people aren't taking new folks, and it's a lot of parents I've spoken to, it's been a challenge. So I'm just curious what you might recommend.
I'm also curious what I might recommend. I think this is just such a challenge right now, and I think waiting lists are long, and so if you can reach out and try to look for that therapist who's going to be a good fit and try to get on that waiting list, it won't hurt you to do that, to go through the intake work to find out if that person's going to be a good fit for you. This doesn't answer that question immediately, but working with your schools, working with the legislators in our area to make sure that these resources are more readily available. I know some of our hospital partners in the area do some programming in schools that provide some social emotional support too, but even those have long waiting lists. So I gotta say, it's just frustrating all the way around. So I wish I had a better answer. But I think the earlier you can start those conversations and start to get on those waiting lists, potentially the better off we'll be. I also think creating, and this is part of what this whole event does, is create an environment where we can have these conversations, and then the adults in these kiddos' lives can model having conversations around their feelings, so that these things that are really difficult to talk about at least become more the norm. They see them and the adults around them and our educators. I think that's what so much of our work is doing, is trying to create that opening so that we can have these talks. And then utilizing programs like the Student Assistance Program, which can help to find resources as well, could be an outlet. I wish I had more recommendations for you, but it is difficult for sure.
You want to say something, Jim?
Yeah, can I just add to that? But it also jumps on top of what Dr. Bailey said. I mean, from a long-term perspective, I encourage every one of you to pick up the phone and call your legislator. There are bills out there for loan forgiveness, for counselors, so that they stay, because a lot of counselors, they build up the loans, they can't afford the loans in the programs, that the careers they want to pursue, and they get out of the career so they can pay off the loan. There are programs that are out there, there are bills that are out there that have been hung up in the legislative process. So, you know, from a long-term perspective, on top of what Dr. Bomgardner said and what Dr. Bailey said, is pick up the phone and call your legislator, because they would love to hear from you, but they would also, then you can also push them to, so that long-term we have a better solution than we have today.
And just to add to that, the workforce development piece, and really encouraging students and young people to go into the helping fields like counseling and social work. And it's a long-term thing, but could be beneficial as well. You have another question?
Very much. Hi, good evening. I just, first of all, want to say, Emma, you absolutely rock. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Especially because I think a big part of it is that your age. It's you know, for our teens that are experiencing and what they're going through, it means so much to talk to other people that are closer to their age. That opens a lot of conversations, I think, a lot. My question is addressed to the two student reps and to you, Emma. How much of what they're going through is influenced by social media, do you feel?
Well, I'll start with that. So from my experience, I'm not currently in school. I've graduated high school. But I can speak to my experience when I was in school. Certainly social media did affect my mental health in a negative way, without a doubt. And I kind of spoke to that in the film briefly, but to emphasize on it a little more, for me, social media was mainly a tool for comparison, and I'm able to reflect and notice that now. Looking back, I would have never admitted that, but it certainly was. And the problem with that for me was the fact that I fully believed that the false realities that were being projected on those platforms were actually reality. And so I was fooled by these perfect lives and these perfect images, and really it was mainly like the other forms of social media, like Snapchat and things like that, where you're seeing your friends at parties or doing things and you weren't invited. It's really damaging for a young person to have to witness that on their cell phone. And then obviously other social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, things like that, those are damaging in the regard of the fact that it just kind of completely distorts a sense of reality and really strips away any type of like sense of what a journey looks like, because I found myself feeling less than. I found myself feeling not good enough because my peers were on a different journey than I was, or they were achieving things at a different time than I was. So it can be very damaging, and it is very damaging. But it is definitely a double-edged sword, because I've experienced the negative and the harms of social media, but I've also experienced the positives and the benefits that do come from social media. So I think it's all about finding your triggers with social media and setting boundaries and understanding in the forefront of your brain and the back of your brain that social media is not real life. So and they can speak to it too. So I kind of like took all the.
No, I think Emma really hit on that. I personally was, I actually did have to take an Instagram break because I caught myself, counting up the comments on my most recent post, wondering why it wasn't as much as my last post. And I consider myself someone who's pretty opinionated, but then I made all my opinions on who I was based on how other people saw me or how other people reacted to what I put out there. And especially being a young woman in this day and age where social media and celebrities, they all project this image that you're constantly striving towards, it's really difficult not to quantify your self-worth. And I think that social media has made women especially, but I know that this affects everyone, it's made us feel worthless, and it's made us feel like we aren't enough with what we have. And so I think it is, exactly like Emma said, so important to be able to recognize the holes that you're falling into. Now I actually turn off comments on my posts because I know that I'm just not going to let myself go down that again. And that's what's important, so.
Well said. Avante, do you have anything to add to that?
They basically said all that I wanted to say, but definitely social media is not real at all. I know that sometimes I'm like, well, why did this person get more likes than me? The same exact picture, but whatever. But it's hard because social media, they're projecting what you should look like and how you should act, and once you start acting like them, you're this really isn't me and this isn't who I'm supposed to be. So it's almost like you're trying to find your identity, but you already had your identity, so they're trying to steal someone else's. So social media is just, to me, is so stupid. It's not real. So
thank you for that. So we have time for maybe one more question. I want to be respectful of people's time. Okay, I think we got there. Do you? Go ahead. No? All right, one more. All right. Okay. We got how about this young man over here in the white shirt? Yeah. Pass it down.
So I had a question for Dr. Bailey. I was wondering if you were planning on implementing a peer-to-peer support group in the school, and if you were not planning to, would you be interested in implementing something like that into the school?
Wow, that's an advocate right there. Put him on the spot.
To be honest, prior to this event, I had not had that thought. But honestly, watching the video and watching Hope Squad, I'm liking it. I think it'd be great.
Yeah, and Avitam, our lovely, it's very similar to Hope Squad, so that's very cool.
I recommend it. 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. And that really is All right, quickly.
Okay. My name is Ray. I'm his father.
Nice.
And I know you guys shared a lot of things, and I'm amazed because I needed to bring him here. I work in the drug and alcohol field. I'm someone in long-term recovery and also suffer from mental health. And trying to be the father figure and raising a kid as a single parent because his mom's never been there for him. And for him to share his struggles, sometimes I blame myself because I think I'm not doing the right thing. The kid has everything that he needs, everything that he wants, and a lot of times he'll tell me, "That is not you." And I struggle with it. But when you guys put into perspective, I said, I'm not your friend, I'm your father, but I'm also here to support you in any decisions that you make. So when I was seeing Emma with a peer specialist, I think that'd be an amazing program to have at Liberty High School, to have a certified peer specialist to come here and talk to the client, but to the students, because I think it'll help them in a long time run.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so we're pretty much out of time. I want to give the panelists to do a quick parting word, and Emma will be out front afterwards too. So we'll just kind of, Dr. Bomgardner, would you have a parting word?
just that we need to keep having these types of events. We need to keep pulling community members together, recognizing what the needs in our communities are, recognizing those resources. I mean, if you didn't get the chance to explore just even a subset of the resources that were outside in that vestibule today, I mean, that's just, a picture of what the Valley is trying to do to support trauma-informed approaches, supportive social-emotional learning environments, and just mental health in general. But obviously there's work to be done. And so as we continue to advocate as a community, we're going to continue to make progress. And I'm just really happy to see everyone here. So thank you for your attendance and participation.
I would say for my last statement is that it is okay to ask for help. I know that it's very hard to sometimes, but it's okay to not be okay sometimes, and it's okay to ask for help. I know as teenagers and sometimes as adults it's looked upon, but it shouldn't be. So it's definitely okay to not be okay.
I would say that silence will never keep you safe. So kind of bouncing off of what he just said, if someone would have told me that it's not weak to be honest about your feelings and your problems, that might have made a difference. And also to know that it's not realistic to always be happy. That's something that I really fell victim into believing. I thought that something was wrong with me, that I was a bad person because I felt that way. But that is totally not the case, and it is so not realistic to always be happy. So that's my parting words, and also a thank you. And also, what is a hoagie?
It's a po' boy.
Am I uncultured or?
It's like a really big sandwich.
Okay.
It's like a sub or or a
Noted.
po' boy with different kind of bread.
Noted. Thank you.
The last thing I want to say, that if someone brings a concern to your attention, if they mention to you that they're feeling some sort of way, take it seriously. Like, I know teens, we can be dramatic. My parents would say that very often. But, think about it. Would you rather have given them the support for a minor concern, or would you rather have not given them support and it turns out to be something major? And, if people had taken it seriously at the very beginning, I think a lot of those stories of suicide would have been mitigated. And that's something that we can do as a society better. And that's something that I think that I want to strive to do every day. So I hope that you guys can share my journey in that.
Thank you. Great.
I guess the first thing I want to say is a tennis shoe is actually a sneaker. Just get you.
No, and it's also a buggy.
A buggy?
Yeah, we
See,
don't
that's a new one. I
shopping
didn't know
carts.
that.
It's a buggy.
So I'd say probably, for me, the most important thing is talk to your legislators. Call them, go to their offices. Right now, I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent, the president right now has put forth a plan that really emphasizes doubling the number of mental health workers in schools across the country. And that now is being pushed to the Senate. And so we have to have our voices be heard by the individuals who actually cast the votes. So you're here, so I'm assuming that this is something you care about. Call, write, visit your senators, your representatives. Make sure that they know how you feel, because it truly makes a difference.
Awesome.
So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and be part of this. I guess my parting words is that let everybody know who's struggling, and you could be struggling from anything. You know that you're not alone, and that reaching out for help is a sign of strength, and there is always going to be somebody out there that'll have your back to help you out, to listen to you. So just reach out and there's always going to be somebody there to help. And I will tell you that while you're in town, you need to try a Philly cheesesteak.
We're on that mission.
My mother would kill me if I didn't try one, so that's on the to-do list for sure.
Awesome. So my parting words are a couple things. One, we really need to deal with this issue upstream. The Surgeon General in his last report on suicide and suicide prevention really put a lot of emphasis on addressing the upstream factors of suicide prevention. And as awesome as the stuff they have going on here at Liberty High School, this needs to be going on in elementary schools where students are learning about mental health and learning it's okay to talk. So by the time they get to high school, it's more of a commonplace and common thing. And that's another thing that y'all can really advocate for. We're just really kind of starting this journey on sharing this film. This is very independent, endeavor. We've been showing, the film a lot in Louisiana and around the country with virtual screenings. Emma's been traveling, a little bit around to different communities. But we'd really love your support in connecting with us on social media. And, because the reality of it is it's a way to reach really a lot of people. I'm sure some of you, if not many of you, found out about this event on social media. But so we are on Instagram, My Ascension Movie, and we're on Facebook. We just love for you to, tell a friend, tag us on Facebook, and help us really spread the word. So with that, really want to give a big round of applause to Liberty High School and Dr. Bailey for hosting this event. And we, really would, hope that we can show this film to more students, around Lehigh Valley, around Pennsylvania, because although it's important for anybody to see, as you've seen, it's important for parents to have this information, but it's also really valuable for students to see, and particularly students to see with their parent, because you can have those conversations. But also wanted to thank Magellan and American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the County of Northampton, and of Lehigh Valley for supporting this, NAMI of Lehigh Valley for supporting this, because it's like these events that are going to really can make a difference if it's followed through with action. Just like Dr. Bailey and Jim had talked about. Calling your legislator, that's a big thing you can do. Also, pretty much all these agencies here, I would venture to say, could use support in some form or fashion. If it wasn't donations, they can use volunteers. And so I encourage you to, to get involved and see what you can do to support this movement. So huge thanks to all of our panelists. This was an amazing panel discussion. And we look forward to hopefully, encountering you on this journey to spread hope and fight suicide. So thank you. And again, thank you to all the Liberty team for making this happen. So.